just right for oral history, stories that we want to capture. And yeah, and I had to ask us, what is it? So it's a series of podcasts. Can I ask, hands up if you use podcasts at all? Great. Fantastic. I think it's brilliant. It's one of the most democratic forms of listening and radio. It's just absolutely super stuff to work with. We also work with archive recordings. When I started doing the podcast and put more and more out, suddenly a box arrived, which I'll talk about more in a moment, and it's still in the corner of our house, working away, getting its, getting through it with reel-to-reel things. It's a real treasure. So we've got archive recordings, and I think there's more to come from yourself as well, isn't there? Thank you. Films as well. We've stepped into the world of film with things as well. I'm a film and theatre maker by trade, so to do things with film actually kind of works quite nicely with it, keeping it active. And then community events as well. I think it's really, really important that you kind of share your skills and pass them on and allow other people to kind of explore what you do. So, right. What is intangible cultural heritage? Anyone? I don't know if this is exactly what Anne said earlier on, but the definition that UNESCO has for intangible cultural heritage, and if you want, we can send you the PowerPoint as well. Anne's got a copy of it if anyone wants a copy. There's a link here. Intangible heritage includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. Things that float away, things that are ephemeral. When someone goes, there's a great quote, when someone dies, it's like a library burning down. And I've always been very conscious of that with the nature of this project. And it's got to the stage when there's so many tradition bearers and tradition keepers, unfortunately, passing on with as people get older and older. It's quite a thought to kind of go out and chap someone's door and go, "Hello, can I speak to you?" Because you think, "Oh no, I'm the Grim Reaper." You've got to be really careful. So what am I trying to do with what we do in the winter? The first answer I put on my PowerPoint was, I don't really know. I'm navigating by instinct. So I would try to harness it down into a few things. I think finding, sharing stories. Common humanity is what we're all about. Just finding common points between us all that people can really relate to. There's the people living on the islands of Mull, Iona, Alva, and Erid is just insane. There's so many people of so many different types of life experience there, and from young people to older people, and it's extraordinary. And I'm also looking to search for authentic voices to express a diverse range of experience of the life on the island. It's not. Are you an islander? Yes, I'm an islander. Game over. It's not that. It's so much more complicated than that. Everyone has their own story, and I know when I go to ask someone, can I speak to you for the podcast? If they say, "Oh, I've got nothing to say," you're like, yes, that's the good stuff. Whereas if someone goes, "Oh, yes, of course," I'm like, "Oh, you're back of the list." So, one of the things that someone said to me who was working on the pier in Tobermory, the kind of cafe, the lovely cafe they had there, I was chatting to them one day and they said that a tourist had said to them, "When the last tourists leave, do you go home to Oban?" Exactly. It makes you wee with rage. It's just awful. And I think this is one of the things I really wanted to address. If you want to take your phone call, you can go outside. It's all right. One of the things I wanted to address was this notion that people on islands and rural communities are just seen as, "Oh, look, there they are, a wee Highland cow." And I really, really want to get past that notion. So it's how do we give account for people's lives, the richness and diversity of people's lives. So, one quote which I found really useful to define what I'm looking at was, and this shows you the chain, I'm always interested in this chain of transmission, the oral history essentially. It's the forward to Nan Shepherd's Living Mountain, where Robert Macfarlane, I'm going to use the laser, Robert Macfarlane quotes Patrick Kavanagh. And I'm putting it to you now, so that's 4 links down in the chain. This is a tradition carrying on. Patrick Kavanagh is quoted by Robert Macfarlane in the foreword to Nan Shepherd's Living Mountain and says, he was an Irish poet, Patrick Kavanagh, "I see the parish not as a perimeter, but an aperture, a space through which the world can be seen. All great civilizations are based on parochialism. To know fully even one field or one land is a lifetime's experience. In the world of poetic experience, it's depth that counts, not width. A gap in a hedge. a smooth rock surfacing, a narrow lane, a view of a woody meadow, the stream at the junction of 4 small fields. These are as much as a man can fully experience. And I thought that was really pretty tight. So by looking into the macro, we see the whole world. By looking at the micro, we see the whole world. I think that's really it. Trying to just discover what's going on. And that's why I've chosen this background here as the background for this. This is my daily commute when I do my dog walk. I take my dog around Ripley, and we walk past this little beach, Oban, and that's the island of Rum. You can see it there. And then Cana is just beyond there as well, of course, which has got a major history and oral tradition. And so much stuff there as well. And this is somewhere that means really a lot to me. So I thought that was a good place to go. So to start off with, when I came up with the idea, I thought, right, who's the first person to speak to? And I moved to Mull in 2007 from Dunoon. I'm originally from Dunoon. And the first person that made me really feel at home in Mull and made me think, actually, this is where I want to be, was a gentleman called Duncan McGilp. And Duncan was just amazing. He used to, hands up if anyone knew Duncan at all. Does anyone? Ah, fantastic, yeah, aye. So Duncan was just remarkable. He ran the local garage. He was an extremely skilled man. He'd been a soldier during the Second World War. In fact, he'd been in the SAS in the Second World War. Extraordinary stories and a remarkable depth of life. And so I thought the first person to speak to would be Duncan McGilp. And I've got 2 minutes of just Duncan talking about something for you here. It's about 2.5 minutes.
And what was it like growing up here? What did you do for fun?
I worked.
From an early age?
Yes. I worked on the pier as a boy in school with the stevedores, and I got 10 shillings a week. I was the youngest person on my brain's payroll. And I worked with McGaughan.
Really? Ah, over the other side? Was he over that way?
No, no.
He was at the Tobermory pier?
He was just next door.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time with him.
What was McGaughan like?
He was a very kind man. He was very small, immensely strong, unique in many ways. He was in the First World War at the age of 16. He was at the Dardanelles.
Oh God.
Yes, survived.
Blooming heck.
His brother Johnny, who was known as McGregor, he finished up with ponies on Iona, but McGaughan was my favourite. I knew him very well. There's an old lady, Lola Bell. She was 92. She was 102 last Wednesday.
Goodness me.
And she and McGaughan were very friendly, just friendly. Mm-hmm. And they both sort of nurtured me as a young child, and they called me Wee Duncan. So when I write a wee dusty card, I said, "Love from Wee Duncan." They both called me Wee Duncan.
Goodness me.
McGaughan's language was very colourful. So much so that the chief engineer on the mill boat, Mr. Chalmers, took my father to task for allowing me to spend so much time in the company of this foul-mouthed man, and your boy learned a lot of bad language. Oh, my father, he learned that wherever he is. There's no scarcity of that. But he learned things from McGaughan that he wouldn't learn from anybody else. He was an expert horseman, shepherd, crackpot with a rifle.
Really?
Yes, and a boatman. Very talented man.
The amount of people around the world that have heard Duncan talking about McGaughan, talking about other people, this means that names carry on. There's a thing that says, you only truly die when the last time your name is mentioned. Well, hopefully this will keep going. People will still hear the name McGaughan. Funnily enough, there's a pub named after McGaughan anyway. But the connections all over the world. People have listened to this. It's been extraordinary. And one of the things that is really important is I try and take myself out of the picture as much as possible. I try and be the listener. So I try and imagine that I'm the listener at home listening to when I'm talking to the people rather than based around my own ego. The brilliant podcast, Reason Why, from Cornwall. If you're interested in podcasting, if you're interested in community dynamics and stresses, check out The Reason Why. The chap there puts himself at the core of the podcast, and it's his investigation. It's a totally different approach to what we're doing with this, but it touches on many similar grounds more overtly. Really, really interesting. So that's The Reason Why. But yeah, so Duncan just really, he was just the most wonderful person. He really connected, his stories connected with so many people. Fairly early on in making the podcast, came across my friend Lucy, who runs a garden over on the kind of Ballygown side there, looking onto Ulva. Lucy Mackenzie, she's extraordinary. Her story is quite remarkable. She was Valentino's assistant in Rome, when she was in her teens. Her dad kept the landing orders for Normandy in the downstairs bathroom, that sort of stuff. And then you've got Rock Sanford, who's become quite a famous figure in the last wee while about his environmental activism and standing against change and carbon stuff. Anyway, did an episode with Lucy, did an episode with Rock, and it turned out there is a point in common between the two of them. Again, this is about 3 minutes of this.
Have you heard of a White Mischief?
No, I don't know that.
And that the scandal in Kenya when Jocelyn Errol was shot. It was a huge scandal. You don't know anything about that. Happy Valley. You've heard of a Happy Valley in Kenya? Yeah. Well, that all centred around my first cousin, amazingly, because we're talking a long way back. But since he was born, just about the same time, my father must have been, very, very small child when he was born. He was the centre of that. He was Jocelyn Errol, who was killed in the Happy Valley scandal. Huge scandal.
Oh, goodness.
There was a film made called White Mischief, which was very, very popular about that. He had been having an affair with somebody's wife, and he got himself killed anyway.
Goodness.
Nobody quite knew how. Anyway, so...
Basically, when I was a child, I knew my grandfather's older brother had got involved in a scandal, but my grandfather never wanted to talk about it. And there were lots of rumours as to what it might have been.
Uh-huh.
There seemed to be a lot of scandals in my family, but anyway. And anyway, it turned out that when Jos Errol was murdered, one of the suspects was Jock Delsbroughton.
Yes.
And Jock had an alibi, which was provided by my great-aunt June. However, the next day after the murder, he was walking with my cousin, Juanita, who was a lovely woman, who saw that on the bonfire behind his house, he was burning some white plimsolls. And she thought this was really odd because you normally gave your plimsolls to someone who really needed shoes, and you didn't burn them. And so she asked him why he was burning them. And he said, she told me, that you mustn't tell anyone, but I killed Jos. And
goodness me.
I'm burning the plimsolls so that they're not used in evidence against me. Later, a bit more emerged, which was that my great-uncle, John, had a hotel in Kenya. He was part of the Happy Valley set, him and June, his wife. And the Happy Valley set were the people, the sort of very dissolute, kind of dodgy, slightly dodgy people who were sitting out the Second World War in Kenya.
Ah, right.
And so he was part of it. He owned this hotel called the Eden Rock Hotel. And a workshop attached to the hotel recently, people were fixing the roof. And they found a gun. Not that recently, actually, while he was still alive. So they knew it had been his workshop. So they contacted him, and he apparently arrived with a completely white face and took the gun and went out to the reef offshore and dropped it in the sea. And so it turns out that was the gun that killed poor Jos Errol.
Oh, goodness me.
And Jock Delsbroughton had dropped it into a fountain at the hotel. And then John, my great-uncle, had gone to the fountain and retrieved it and hidden it in the roof of his workshop. And then it had been discovered, so then he was panicking because he would have been an accessory.
It's quite something. That's and that the coincidence is that that Lucy just lives a few miles from you, and there's so few people in between.
It is odd, isn't it? Yeah.
It's really quite something.
So yeah, that's these weird wee coincidences. I mean, that's an international murder case solved. But it's strange. There's all these sort of coincidences and pathways keep crossing over. There are now 66, 67 episodes of the podcast. So yeah, there's loads and loads and loads. I believe that we spoke quite early on as well. Yep. Also, Doc Holliday, who might be watching in America. He is also from Tidy. He was also one of my victims as well. And on Collinsay, I've spoken to PD and Netta as well, which has been fantastic. So yes, archive recordings. When I started doing this, a box of archive recordings appeared, and it was this beautiful box of reel-to-reel tape. And I was like, oh my goodness, what do you do with that? Reel-to-reel machines are not small. They're really hefty beasts. And because they're from a long time ago, the rubber bands inside them are sometimes a little bit tight, sometimes a little bit slack. So you have this weird kind of thing going on. So I've got two reel-to-reel machines in my office, and we're going through this archive. And the tapes belonged to a lovely character called Donald Langamel, who was Plain, who ran a shop in Tobermory in the upper part of the town. And he went around, much like myself, and spoke to people. But he also recorded from the local historical society. And it was given to the Mall Museum in Tobermory, and that's how, through my wife's work. And we've been encoding them and putting them up very slowly. It's really interesting, some of the stuff in there. Here's another clip, and we called it the project, What We Do in the Archives. There's this amazing man called Lachie Knock, who I never met. Partly, What We Do in the Winter was sort of inspired by the work of Timothy Neat. I'm sure many of you know who Timothy Neat is. Timothy Neat spoke to Lachie in a book called When I Was Young, The Islands. And it was very interesting hearing what Lachie's daughter-in-law had to say about it, because for me it was really inspiring, but for Lachie, he said he was really frustrated. It didn't come across as he said it, and so that there was this nature between the spoken word and then the transcribed word is really, really interesting. So here's Lachie talking about oral transmission for thousands of years.
There's another one before that called Donald Blair in Lochway, who I believe was the greatest historian of the lot in verse and in prose. That's where I got most of the little I do know is from this prose, which some people acquired. And it was a type of, I can't remember, I don't know what it was long, lengthy verses of prose, which had been taught to them, must have been from a very early age. They call it Candrach in Mull. Ross, they call it in other parts. But this Candrach is something the same as the piper. Pipers learn tunes by the sort of mouth music. But these people learned the history by the same sort of, it had an intonation sort of, which they could, what was always noticeable is if they got stuck there, they went back a bit and they started again. And I learned at a very early age that it was a very true account of these things that happened. There would be cross checks in it. If they were talking about something that happened in Queen Elizabeth's reign, at a certain date they would say Am Ri Baranalisich, Am Bal Rivari, which was the time of Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary's reign. Earlier than that they would say Am Wathin Pulpina, who was the progenitor of the clan MacLean as we know it today. That the thing, when there was verses and verses and verses, that the terrible pity that there was no tape recorders, and we were all at an age then where we didn't even think of writing things down. We were apt to agree with them that history was a bit of old hat. That it was a tremendous lot. The last person who I knew was the late Hugh McNeilage. I think quite a few people remember him. A tremendous person altogether who really had Mull history from almost Pictish times. He could recite things that happened in the beginning of the Scots colonisation in Mull. He could even, whether we didn't doubt it, but he could recite even the names of animals to be found on the island there that have been extinct for years and years. There is one name that I can always remember. It's still a part of Knock, and it's a word called Duhusk. It's called Niekna Duhusk, which means the nest of the something. No one can tell us, we haven't ever found out what a Duhusk is. Today that place is called the Eagle's Nest, but Duhusk was not an eagle because Duhusk and eagle. Things like that, it's really tragedy when these... But,
So that's an oral history tale of a bird that went extinct before English came to the island. Now that's going back. And so oral history is it's just amazing. There's just a depth of connections. I was listening to Tupper and Dolhish one night, and I was walking across Oban, and there was a person talking to, I think Callum from that society was talking to one of my late uncles on Colonsay, recorded before I was born, and he'd said to him in Gaelic, "Jamie Yen and Thatcher Shaw, Bonavay," in Gaelic. What about this place, Bonavay? And both my uncle and myself, 40, nearly 50 years apart both went Bonavay instead of Bonavay. It was just that connection across those years. The Colonsay Gaelic was still there. The connection, the sound of it is still there, which is very, very much under threat as well. So the archive stuff, there's dozens and dozens of recordings to come out. So if you're interested, it's on the What We Do in the Winter site where you can access everything. I don't put the archive stuff out on the podcast feed. It's on a separate feed, so if you want to, you find it through the website for that. So during lockdown, we were all scunnered, and it came to my wife and I, we could actually ask everyone on the island to do a little bit of filming and see if they would do a minute of recording and see what they could find and record the island at that moment in time. And so we made this film called Island. I'll just show you the part of the trailer for it. I won't show you the whole thing, but yeah, it's you'll see. So we premiered this online in May. What does it say there? I think it was June. I think it was we premiered it. The live premiere was watched by hundreds of people all across the world. You can tell who they were by how they were interacting with this. And then over the course of the following weeks, thousands of people watched this film. And it's been in the screen machine, it's been in cinemas, it's toured around about again and again. And it's an account, a visual history of a moment in time that hopefully we won't be going back to. So that was really important to that. The next film we made was called Cleave on Chinish. Thank you very much. Creel of Stories. The Creel of Stories, Cleave and Chinish. And this was funded by Year of Stories last year, and also through the work of the Southwest Mull Iona Development Company, who are fantastic. They're really great. And it was to look at what is the story of fishing in the Ross of Mull and Iona. And I'll show you again the trailer for this. I might dash forward a wee bit on this, I'm conscious of the time going on, but this is the trailer.
The deep, mysterious blue, lapping and crashing against the shore, dancing the tango back and forth, crash, crash, crashing against the crooked rocks. Hauling the creels back on the boat, the fisherman's glove grabs the rope, reflecting on the pulling tide, crash, crash, crashing against the crooked rocks. As the seals sleep, the dolphins leap, herons head home while whales weep, salty seas spray.
So you can see there were quite a few well-known characters in there, and it had 3 phases. The first of which was about the salmon netting, which was a really interesting period in time. I think one of the last salmon nets in Argyllshire was Derek and Sheila, I think, down over there as well. And so the south end of Mull was covered in these nets, and it's quite an extraordinary story. So that was the first phase. The second phase was looking at creel fishing when that came in, and what that meant to the people who fished and their families. And then the third phase was looking at 2 contemporary practitioners of a fishing craft, one a fisherman and one a restaurant. And it's a fascinating piece of work. I loved pulling it together. People seemed to really enjoy it, and when we showed it to the community, there was a lot of it really resonated with them, which is exactly what I was after. We also do community events, so we do what we do in the winter live, which there was one live event just before the pandemic came, the lockdown, literally the Saturday before the Wednesday, I think it was, and one of our raffle prizes was a hand sanitizer, because it was so hard to get a hold of. How we laughed. Then there's been 2 more online since then. There's been one about boats and one about the sea, and one about sport as well. And I'm hoping to do another one in the next month as well, so more on that another time. The other project that came up was invited by 4Argyll to do a project called 4Argyll, and 4 was across all the island communities to do arts engagement through or Gaelic medium stuff as much as possible. Only one Gaelic unit took part on the island, but we managed to speak to Lochdawn, Benesson and Ulva, and we used the skills of podcasting. It was my friend Hannah Fisher who did the music for the trailer for both films actually. She and myself went out and we wrote songs with kids. We got them to do sound experiment recording, all sorts of weird things around the world around them, and we got them to interview their community. We got them to talk to the older folk in their community, and it was really fascinating. And I'll give you a very brief example. This is Soren, who's Hannah's partner, who also wrote the music as well. This is him talking to the kids in Benesson, and I'll skip forward through it.
Hello, I am Soren McLean, and I live down the road. I live in Kintra, and I've lived on Mull almost my whole life.
So you can see that it's carrying on the tradition, it keeps on going. Right, do you have any questions before we hand back to Anne at all? Any questions at all? Has anyone engaged with podcasts? Yes, yeah. Yes, there are 3-4 people on Gometra at the moment, I think. Maybe 5. The daughter of one of the family goes to school here in Oban, but there's Andy and his wife. And Rock Sanford lives there most of the time. He's actually pretty much given up living in London in Mayfair to go and live in Gometra. So Rock is a really interesting character. It's worth having a look at Stacey Dooley's programme with him as well. There've been a couple of different programmes. So yeah. There's a school, the schoolhouse, as you go across the bridge, or from Alva there. I've not been in. I don't know how much is in there really, to be honest. Is there? It's just amazing. It's one of the most interesting places in terms of the landscape, because there's all the fairy hummocks around still, and if anywhere where the she are, they're going to be there. There's no 2 ways about it, and they don't like iron. Many.
For example, so there's big stories still to be had.
Gotcha, and Alva as well. There's Alva. The volume of people that we put across the Napoleonic Wars it doesn't compute really. Yeah, Gometra's so there's a really interesting thing that when if you left from Ulva from the north side to emigrate, you went to North America, and if you left from the southwest, the south side, you went to Australia.
What do you do about missions? Do you follow normal folk societies or history practice? And what do you do with little children and teaching them?
So I use as a filmmaker, I have a release form that I use, and I just have a release form for the participants as well to take. I haven't the rushes, the unedited files to the School of Scottish Studies originally, but actually I've realised that so many times when you're talking to someone, there's something comes up in confidence, you can't put that out. And so it exists as an edited form. I think it's unfair. The families can have the raw unedited files as they have had. In fact, one person who spoke to at Christmas who just passed away, I gave them the video file as well, and that was really, really special.
It looks as though this might be a really good subject for a training session at some time. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there,
thank you very much.
Alistair, but
thank you
very much, and thank you for your questions.